I'm going to touch on the concept of conducting a retention reload with something like a dump pouch and talk about some of the arguments people have made against it, and just to talk about my own experience. Now, I do not believe in retaining mags or not dumping them on the ground or whatever in things like CQB, home defense, and areas where it's reasonable. I'm not going to retain mags, when I'm doing concealed carry training or anything like that. That just doesn't make any sense. So, with that said, when it comes to light infantry tactics, like out in the woods or whatever, or in rural, fighting conditions, I believe that retaining your mags is actually a big deal, because the amount of ammo that you can expect to use if things get bad, you're going to probably want to replenish that. So we'll talk about that in a little bit, but let's go and talk about the concept of reloading in a combat environment anyways. So a lot of the small unit tactics over the years have been, really atrophied because of the war on terror. We got really comfortable bullying people that weren't near peers. So they did a lot of raids and a lot of, baby Delta work, where they would just reload in place. And, it was really easy because the threats that they were encountering weren't all that sophisticated, so they didn't really have equally trained forces that they had to worry about. Now in Ukraine, trying to apply these same principles, wow, they've been getting their asses kicked. So they've had to adapt and do these old school, functions, even digging trenches. So let's go ahead and talk about a proper combat reload. So first thing you're going to do is you're going to be firing, and then you're going to detect that your gun's not firing anymore. The first thing you're going to do is get to a better position to cover, whether that's taking a prone, lowering your profile, or getting behind something that will prevent bullets from going through, or just concealing yourself from the enemy. While you're getting to cover, you're going to want to communicate with your team that you have a stoppage, which means that for some reason your gun is stopped. It's not a specific thing, it's just that your gun is stopped. Then you're going to try to put your weapon on safe, because you might have to maneuver and stuff like that, and it just goes along with weapons handling that if you're not shooting, then your weapon's on safe. When you're in cover and you've already communicated all that, you put your weapon on safe, you're going to look at your ejection port and figure out what's going on. You want to take a deep breath during this because you want to see what's going on and actually register it so you can do the proper drill. You're not just trying to do the tactical guerrilla where you're just like moving around and trying to go ape shit because you're just losing your mind and you're trying to be the gross motor skills person. I'm here to tell you, nothing you're doing when shooting a rifle is gross motor skills, alright? So you're going to reload, and then you're going to get out from cover. You're going to fire 2 rounds, and you're going to communicate to your team that you're back in if those 2 rounds actually fire successfully and your gun is functioning properly. Then your stoppage drill as a whole is done. So the combat reload is a subset of the stoppage drill. I just want you guys to see that. So you treat malfunctions the same way. You don't look at the gun first. Whatever the situation may be, you may or may not be able to put the weapon on safe, because you just put it on if you can. If you can't put the weapon on safe, you probably got a type 1 malfunction, because the hammer's going forward. You can't put the weapon on safe if it's an AR, at least. So, with that said, that really is the core of what I'm talking about, because a lot of people say retaining your magazine takes too long. Well, there's a couple of things going on with that. A lot of people that are saying that, when they try to retain magazines, or they see people trying to retain magazines, they see people using dump pouches that are on like their butt or way out of the way. Like they're having to reach behind them and they're using a dump pouch that is like, it's almost like a plastic bag. It just has no structure to it to where they can actually tell if they've inserted the magazine or not. It's not like this Condor one that has a solid plastic lip where they can just throw the thing in there. It's almost like a jet funnel mag well where you can just throw the magazine in there and you're good. They're not using good gear for it, and they're not using a good strategy for placing that gear in an optimal area. It's almost like putting your mag pouches on the opposite side and behind you. That's how I see it. When I see people with dump pouches behind them, especially those tiny ones, I grew up in the Marine Corps being told to put my dump pouch where I was naturally going to go anyways, which is, if you're dumping an empty mag, you're going to want to go for fresh mags, right? So put it in the same area, but put it out of the way so when you're running and you're going down into a prone, like during fire team rushes and stuff like that, or buddy rushes, you don't end up laying on those empties. That can hurt. Trust me, I've done it as a young Marine, and I never did it again. So, with that said, I feel like people are saying it takes too long because they're coming at it from a point of ignorance, or maybe they're old school like Max is, where he had to dump stuff down his shirt. He didn't have a proper dump pouch, and even if he did, it was probably one of those tiny ones that could only take one or two, or it wasn't trained so much, so they would excuse it from their training just because they were like, well, if it takes me that long, then yes, I am sacrificing time, and I'm using way too much time trying to retain it, and that makes sense. But with gear availability today and stuff like that, and your understanding of a procedure, there's no excuse not to, retain your magazines in a rural combat environment. So, the next thing is, let's talk about the concept of replacing magazines as a civilian. So, this means that you've gone through all these magazines and you just dump them. And when you get back to base or whatever, you got to replace these magazines, right? You might have some in your assault pack where you can plus up a couple of these, but you may have to get back to base before you can actually get new magazines and more ammo. That is all going to be on your dime, and a lot of people will lecture, well, a magazine's not worth my life, so I'm not going to train to retain them. That is highly ignorant, because last time I checked, most people had more ammo than they did magazines. Alright, let me just show you a collection I have. This is just a small collection. I've got them in rucksacks and stuff like that, all loaded out for weight. But I've got some Mission First Tactical magazines right here that are good for, any kind of range training. They're considered, disposable to me because, they're cheap. But also they're polymer. They're not going to do very good in extreme weather. So if they break while I'm training, cool. But if not, I'm still retaining those because they have value, even in a bad situation. If they end up dying or they split or they break or whatever, yeah, I'm dumping them on the ground. That makes sense, but that's when they've gone bad. When these go bad, you know what I do? I retain the springs and the followers. But these are disposable in the body if I can help it. And actually, I have an example of this. Right here, I have a bucket full of parts. That is a Magpul mag from one of the Magpuls that ruptured just from fully loading it. I didn't do anything else but fully load it. And here I have all my metal magazines. These are the ones that are definitely not disposable in my opinion because guess what? These things are going to have difficult lips to bend. They're not going to fracture or whatever. They might rust a little bit, but you can always clean them off. They're always going to be more durable in general than polymer mags. So also they're going to work with the military bandoliers that I have for reloads and putting it in a combat or assault pack or whatever because they have the little buttons there that correspond with the bandoliers and stuff. It's just a really convenient way of carrying your extra reloads or whatever. But I have all these magazines, but am I just going to be like, well, I have a huge number of magazines, so I'm just going to get comfortable with dumping them on the ground? No. But that leads me to my last argument. The people that claim that magazines are disposable items, here's my challenge to you. I challenge you to, the next time you go to training, next time you go to the range, whatever, every time you do a reload, pistol, rifle, whatever, practice what you preach and just leave your magazine there. Don't go back and get it. Go ahead and prove what you're saying. Live up to it. Go ahead and buy a whole new magazine just after one reload. Just saying. That would be the sensible thing to do. If you're going to start doing this and you're going to start talking shit and say stupid shit, then maybe you need to live up to it, alright? I don't think that I'm going to be able to retain every magazine on here. I can get to a point where it's like, okay, I just need to reload this and whatever. If that's what I do when the time comes, fine. I don't care. A magazine's not worth my life, but if I can retain my magazines, I have a drill that I have drilled over and over and over again to where I really have a hard time getting it wrong. The amount of times I've gotten a speed reload wrong where I have not retained the magazine is much greater than when I have retained the magazine, and here's why. When I retain a magazine, I'm taking the empty one out. Gravity does not always get that magazine out, and trying to flick it out does not always work. And thereby, you're going to have to grab it, and you're going to have to pull it out. I've come upon situations where it is not easy to do that all the time, especially if you're working in the wild or rural environments and you foul up some stuff. So it usually takes a bit of a yank. Having another magazine in your hand doesn't really facilitate it all that well. So, being down in the prone, you're not going to be able to use your little speed reload technique. You're going to have to actually grab it. Thereby, your static, standing, imitating your paper target type of reloads are not going to facilitate you being able to conduct a good same reload in the prone. It just does not work the same, especially if you're trying to stay really low to the ground. All right. So there's a lot of time that I've put into, training this in and out of conflict zones. So I'm not coming at it from a point of, I just want to stick with what I did in the military. I've walked away from this concept, but I have also come back to it. Because I have lost magazines, even in training. I've lost magazines on my property. I've lost magazines on training ranges and in rural environments because I used to just dump magazines. I would lose them accidentally, and that was back when I used my Steyr AUG where I didn't have AR mags. Each one of them is like $30, $35 a pop. So there's a lot of reasons why I'm not going to, sit there and just dump mags. And it's not that I'm prioritizing mags over life. I'm prioritizing doing things reasonably because guess what? At the end of the day, if you have more rounds than you do magazines, then there's a problem. Because guess what happens when you run out of your magazines? You're not going to, just retain magazines because you think you're supposed to. Not under stress. You're going to default to your level of training, and you're going to keep dumping magazines out. And what if you have to arm other people, too? You have to give them a combat load and everything else. So you're like, well, I have extra mags or whatever, but you want to arm your spouse, you want to arm your neighbor, you want to arm this person, that person, whatever, and then you need to cross-load ammo all the time in mags. Well, pretty soon you're going to be out. So maybe you should have been retaining mags to begin with so that when you actually come back, you have some magazines that you can actually load. See, I'm looking at this in the long term, not just the short term, because I can tell you this. $10 a mag, relatively, they're falling for the second generation and stuff like that. These are from Global Ordnance, they're steel. They were like $6.99, if not a little less. They were like $4.99, I think it was, for like Black Friday or the Christmas sale. Mission First Tactical, I mean, you can just go on gun.deals and find some pretty cheap polymer mags. But I would stay away from my Pro mags. I mean, you can get pretty cheap mags and consider them disposable, but I would encourage you to put your money where your mouth is and start disposing of them now. And just practice what you preach, right? But other than that, that is just my little spiel on, shitting on people who retain mags. And, if you're not training to retain it with logic, i.e. putting a dump pouch on your ass instead of like where your extra mags are, then yeah, you're being an idiot and you're not, really retaining your mags in a smart way. But if you are and people are just shitting on you anyways, well, that's coming from a lot of ignorance. And those are the people that I really have a problem with. But anyways, with all that said, I appreciate you guys watching. Let me know what you think in the comments below.